Peace was never a possibility in a family like mine, but I never imagined my wedding would become a battleground. I'm Eleanor, a 27-year-old newlywed. That ought to have been the most joyous day of my life. Rather, it turned into a confrontation I never desired, but perhaps it was necessary. It all began when Richard and Catherine, my parents, insisted that I invite Vanessa, my older sister, to my wedding. Now, that wouldn't have been a huge concern in a regular situation. However, Vanessa was more than simply a sister. She had slept with my former boyfriend. Give it some time to sink in. Furthermore, my parents had the gall to insist on seeing her despite everything she had done. They made it clear that they wouldn't attend without Vanessa's invitation. For the majority of my life, my own family has treated me with indifference. The golden child, the favorite, and the one who could never do anything wrong was Vanessa. I, on the other hand, was the problematic child who had to struggle for even the merest sliver of affection and care. I therefore made a choice when my parents gave me this ultimatum. It's okay if they wanted to play dirty. I would also participate. I invited someone else instead of my sister. Someone whose appearance would rock the basis of their meticulously crafted image, someone they had betrayed most. And mayhem broke out on the day of my wedding. You must know the context to comprehend why my wedding turned into a battleground, how Vanessa became the family's ideal young princess, while I became their scapegoat. My mother, Catherine, was the type of lady who valued appearances over affection when I was growing up. She constantly had a new high society event, a new fad diet, and a new method of quietly criticizing me. Richard, my father, was even worse. He couldn't be bothered if it didn't have to do with money, business, or his reputation. Then came Vanessa, the daughter they truly desired. There was nothing Vanessa could do wrong. While she received all the attention, accolades, and possibilities, I felt like I was just taking up space. Vanessa was able to get what she desired. And somehow, it was always my fault if she made a mistake. She sent me to boarding school. Small lies like broken vases, lost cash, or objects going missing for no apparent reason were the beginning of it all, and Vanessa would always pretend to be innocent and point the finger at me. My parents, of course, thought she was real. She went too far, though. She once broke a crystal dish that had been a family heirloom for centuries. Who did she hold accountable for her actions? Me. They had already decided, regardless of how much I vowed not to have done it. My penalty? My parents sent me away because they didn't believe me and thought I was too much of a bother. I was gone, out of sight, out of mind, in an instant. And truthfully, getting rid of them should have made me feel better. However, as a child, your only want is to be loved in return by your family, even if they don't. The penalty my parents had hoped for boarding school did not materialize. It was my getaway, if nothing else. Being thrown out like a bother, knowing that Vanessa got to stay at home and enjoy all the attention, was painful at first. But I eventually realized that I shouldn't wait for them to show concern. I pushed myself into my studies, developed friends of my own, and discovered happiness away from the shadow of my family. I had changed by the time I went back home for college. Vanessa? She hadn't. It was like entering a combat zone to live with her once more. Having me back threatened to take away her urge to be the center of attention. The thought of everyone comparing us was too much for her to handle. She made my life miserable, which is what she always did best. In order to make me look foolish, she would twist things or bring up humiliating childhood events in her snarky remarks whenever we were around her friends. If she hosted a gathering, she didn't invite me. What if I had accomplished something? She would minimize it or refocus the discussion on herself. The ultimate treachery followed. Derek was my boyfriend while I was a college student. I cared about him, but I wasn't infatuated. I believed that he also cared about me. This was true right up until I saw him with Vanessa. She made no effort to conceal it. She desired that I observe. She smirked as she stood there, acting as though this were just another game. I was reminded once more that she was free to take everything she desired. I went up to my mother in the hopes that she would support me for once. I hoped that she would finally acknowledge Vanessa for her true self. Catherine, however, simply dismissed it. Darling, boys will be boys. Perhaps you ought to have made a greater effort to retain him. That was it. That was the end for me. After packing my things, I departed. I broke off contact. After relocating to a different place and starting a new life, I at last felt liberated. I believed I was free anyway. This will continue right up until my wedding, until they returned, demanding to re enter my life. I made the decision to give them a lesson they would never forget at that point. For the first time in my life was peaceful after severing my links to my family. I eventually met Daniel after attending a new place for college, earning my degree, and starting a career. Daniel was not like any person I had ever met. He was patient, compassionate, and above all, he never made me feel as though I needed to prove myself. I was safe with him. I was in a relationship for the first time that wasn't a power struggle, a test, or a competition. It was authentic. I accepted his proposal without hesitation. Indeed, yes, 1,000 times. However, I was mistaken if I believed that getting engaged would keep my history hidden. My mother, Catherine, hardly noticed the news. Oh, that's fine, I guess. That was that. My father, Gregory, didn't even raise his head from his laptop. Vanessa? She merely chuckled. Wow, you're getting married to someone? I should have known better than to expect anything from them and left it at that. However, I erred by inviting them anyhow. The true drama started at that point. My mother began giving me instructions on how to organize the wedding. Dear, you ought to have it at home. It would be more conventional. No, I'm grateful. Gregory seemed unconcerned as usual, although he did warn me that large weddings are a waste of money. Vanessa? She thought she was going to be my maid of honor. No way. My mother's demand was the biggest surprise that followed. You should invite your sister, I chuckled. Aloud. The person who had ruined my life for years, Vanessa? The individual who had an affair with my lover in order to harm me? The one who had never shown regret for any of it at all? Not at all. Catherine, however, would have none of it. She is a member of the family. You can't simply ignore her. Yes, but I could. I would too. My mother handed me the ultimatum at that point. None of us will attend if Vanessa is not invited. I should have been angry, shouldn't I? Should I have pleaded with them to change their mind? Rather, I simply grinned, because I knew exactly what I was going to do at that very moment. I wasn't going to simply deny Vanessa an invitation. The person my parents had deceived the most was the one I was going to invite. And that would be magnificent. I was more than willing to participate in games if my family wanted to. Did they believe they could compel me to invite Vanessa? All right. However, I also intended to invite another person. A person they had harmed was present. Someone they wished to avoid ever again. Aunt Evelyn. The only family member who truly cared about me as a child was Aunt Evelyn. She was compassionate, encouraging, and above all, she was able to spot my parents' deception. However, she vanished one day. My parents never told me the whole story. Although my parents had presented it as though she had betrayed them, I always had a sneaking suspicion that it was the opposite. I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I located her phone number. I gave her a call, and I could sense the hesitancy in her voice when she picked up. Isabel? I almost started crying when I finally heard my name in her voice. I'm Aunt Evelyn. I really want to come visit you. A pause, and then, panting, where are you? I'll be there immediately. An hour later, we were sitting opposite one another in a small, silent cafe with a lot of unspoken words in the air. When she smiled at me, it was the same warmth I had yearned for all my life, even though she appeared older and a little worn out. I told her everything. I am writing about my parents' consistent support for Vanessa, about how I felt like I never belonged there, how they had abandoned me, and how they had sent me away. They were now insisting that I invite Vanessa to my wedding. I could see the rage in Aunt Evelyn's eyes, even though she listened quietly. When I finished, she shook her head and exhaled deeply. They are still the same. She then did something unexpected. She explained to me why the family had excluded her. They had set her up, by my dad, by my mom. They had convinced my grandmother, Aunt Evelyn's only remaining relative, that she was stealing from her. It was a falsehood. However, my grandma had accepted it. Aunt Evelyn vanished in an instant. It felt like they were trying to erase me. I grabbed her hands as I reached across the table. You should attend my wedding. Startled, she blinked. Are you certain? I tightened my grip on her hands. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. The invites were then sent out. Vanessa wasn't there. What about Aunt Evelyn? She was going to enter that wedding with her head held high. What about my parents? The shock of their lives was on the horizon. There should have been a lot of love, happiness, and excitement on the morning of my wedding. Instead, I experienced the tenseness that comes with knowing that something is going to blow up. Nothing could have prepared me for the display my family was about to put on, but I had braced myself for drama. The event took place in a lovely garden setting with tasteful floral arrangements and soothing candlelight. In order to ensure that every small thing was flawless, my mother-in-law had been invaluable. I felt wanted for the first time in my life, incorporated. Then they came. Arm in arm with my father, Richard, my mother Claire entered first. Heads raised high, they looked down at everyone as if they owned the area, and they were dressed as if they were the honored guests. What lies behind them? Vanessa, wearing a white gown. Indeed. A dress in white. It wasn't surprising to me. She would pull something like this, of course. She transformed my day into hers, which was typical of Vanessa. I didn't respond. She wouldn't get the satisfaction from me. However, their faces froze as they looked around at the guests. Aunt Evelyn caught their attention, occupying the very front row, where she was supposed to be. My mom's mouth opened a little in surprise. My dad's jaw tightened. Vanessa, too? She appeared to have seen a ghost. There was only uncomfortable stillness for a few seconds. Then my mom came charging at me. Why is she in this place? In an attempt to maintain the appearance of courteous smiles in front of the guests, she growled beneath her breath. I cocked my head while speaking in a cool, collected, and lethal tone. I want her here, which is why she's here. I take it you told me that? This has to do with maintaining family harmony. Unable to speak, she blinked. My father took hold of my wrist and squeezed it more forcefully than was required. Isabel, this is serious business. Here, she is not welcome. With my eyes burning from years of suppressed rage, I abruptly withdrew my hand. Vanessa isn't either. Despite this, she dresses as if she's the bride. Vanessa crossed her arms and scoffed. Oh, Isabel mature, you're simply resentful. You have always been. I smiled slowly and knowingly at her. Angry? What precisely is it about? She didn't respond, since she was aware. I had created a life without her, and she was aware that she had stolen everything she could from me. I was victorious. My husband, my wonderful, encouraging husband, stepped in before my mother could drag this out any further. You're welcome to stay if you're here to celebrate, Isabel, he stated in a courteous but forceful tone. If not, we would be more than pleased to have you escorted out by security. There was silence in the room. My dad got red in the face. My mother, obviously displeased, gasped. Vanessa appeared to be on the verge of blowing up. After that, my mom did what she does best. She pretended to be the victim. She shook her head fiercely and held her chest as if she had been stabbed. This is how you treat us after all that we have done for you? She sobbed. On your wedding day, you make fun of your own family? I gave her a deadpan look. Mom, what specifically have you done for me? Quiet. I lowered my voice to a harsh, uncompromising tone. You never stood up for me, as I recall. You expect me to act as though nothing happened after allowing Vanessa to ruin my entire life? My voice was hardly more than a whisper as I moved closer. I have nothing to repay you. My mother's face broke, but it was from astonishment rather than remorse. She never imagined that I would confront her. She assumed that I would always be the submissive, silent daughter. No more. Vanessa rolled her eyes and sighed. You're so dramatic, God. Don't you simply enjoy being the victim? I chuckled. In fact, I laughed, because it was too ironic for her to say that. I looked to Aunt Evelyn after taking a long breath and slowly letting it out. Are you prepared? I inquired. She stood tall and nodded. Definitely. My grandmother, who was sitting next to her, reached out and squeezed her hand. At that point, the real mayhem started. My mother became aware of the situation. Grandma and Aunt Evelyn had reconciled, and my parents weren't in charge for the first time in decades. My dad's face became pale. In a distressed voice, my mother sought Grandma's hand. Don't tell me you're siding with her, Mother. Grandma simply shook her head to interrupt her. I've been on your side too long. Quiet. At last, they felt the consequences of what they had done. and I saw terror in my mother's eyes for the first time in my life. She was aware. The falsehoods were over, she knew. Vanessa remained silent for a while before losing her temper. This is crazy. She has successfully indoctrinated everyone. You're all behaving as though she's a saint. She turned to my husband, Ryan, and said, And you? Are you truly comfortable with her betraying her own family? Ryan simply shrugged. I don't mind Isabel picking the people who truly care about her. And that? Checkmate was the result. I went back to my folks. You are welcome to remain. However, I won't think twice about having you escorted out if you say anything else. My dad's fists clenched. My mom shuddered. They were aware of their defeat, nevertheless. Thus, they said nothing. I had won for the first time in my life. What's the best part? The evening had not yet ended. What is the cause of my sister's illness? She was going to receive just what she was due. They were in the middle of the reception. I felt free for the first time in a long time, as glasses clinked in jubilation and laughter filled the air. Naturally, Vanessa was far from finished. Her face was gloomy as she pouted in the corner, holding a half-empty champagne flute. Still too stunned to talk, my parents sat at their table. Grandma and Aunt Evelyn sat together and reconstructed years of lost time through silent conversation. And me? I was perfectly comfortable in my surroundings, joyful, cherished, free. The situation escalated right up to Vanessa's last move. She began by letting out loud sighs, followed by less than subtle whispers to the guests seated close to her table. When she realized no one was giving her the attention she desired, she did what she did best. She got to her feet. The room echoed with the sharp clinking sound as she tapped her glass with a fork. Then, in the most inflated, egotistical tone she could muster, she said, "Let's address the issue at hand, shall we?" The music ceased. The visitors pivoted. Beside me, my spouse stiffened, his hand tightening around mine. In a panic, my mother shook her head and motioned for Vanessa to take a seat again. Vanessa wasn't finished, though. She gave me one of those cheesy, malevolent smiles I'd grown up with. Isabel has spent her whole life acting like the victim. But let's not forget who she really is. She's always been jealous of me, always hated me because I was the better sister. There was a murmur among the people. Vanessa's self-assurance increased. You didn't invite me because you were scared, were you? She chided. Scared that I would outshine you, just like I always have? I let out a slow breath. Why did Vanessa look like this? Vanessa looked like this. She set it on fire when she lost control of the situation. My husband gave me a slight nod as I looked at him. Proceed. Put an end to this. So I got up, and I did something that made everyone in the room shiver. I chuckled. I strolled over to her, shaking my head and chuckling softly. I moaned, "Oh, Vanessa," loud enough for everyone to hear. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Her smile wavered. She yelled. What's so funny? I allowed the silence to grow as I took my time. Then I spoke in a steady, calm, and deadly voice. You think I'm jealous of you? I waited for the words to sink in. I tilted my head and said, What exactly am I supposed to be jealous of? The fact that you stole my ex-boyfriend and still ended up alone. The fact that you spent your whole life trying to one-up me, and yet here I am happy, successful, and surrounded by people who love me. The visitors shuffled uneasily. No one intervened to protect her. Some merely stared, while others muttered. Not even our parents. For the first time in her life, everyone recognized Vanessa for who she truly was. Her eyes were flaming with humiliation and anger as she clenched her teeth. She growled, You think you're better than me? I grinned. I don't think, Vanessa, I know. She made a lunge. The wild, desperate look in her eyes, and the way she clutched her champagne glass, as if she were about to toss it, were things I saw before they happened. However, before she could reach me, Ryan put himself in our way. With firmness, he said, I think you should leave. There was utter silence in the room. Vanessa's chest rose and fell quickly, her fists clenched at her sides. Then the last blow was delivered. Aunt Evelyn. Her voice was quiet but strong as she stood. Vanessa, your time in this family has been characterized by lies, cruelty, and manipulation. Today, that ends. Vanessa's face twisted in shock as she spun around. You, too? She exclaimed. Then she's right. Who is the speaking voice? Our mom. For the first time, Claire looked at Vanessa without blind devotion as she stood rigidly. Enough, she said in a whisper. You've caused enough damage. Vanessa suddenly realized she had no one left. Her previously immaculate white dress now represented everything she had lost as she stood there with her chest heaving. Then she stormed out without saying another word. By themselves. For the first time, all by myself. The tension vanished as soon as she left. The music came back. Talk resumed. It seemed as though the ominous cloud that had threatened my wedding had finally lifted, and I had a sensation I had never experienced before as I stood there and gazed around at the individuals who really cared. Calm. Aunt Evelyn smiled knowingly at me as I turned to face her. You did good, sweetheart. I gave her hand a squeeze. So did you. Grandma drew me into a close embrace. I'm very proud of you, she said in a whisper. You finally took back your power. She was also correct. Throughout my life, I have experienced neglect, mistreatment, and abandonment. However, today, I made my own decision. I felt lighter, more content. And I realized that this was only the beginning as I gazed at my spouse, the love of my life. A fresh chapter. We are forming a new family, one I had selected, one based on honesty, love, and respect. And I was free for the first time. If I've learned anything, it's that family isn't only about blood. It all comes down to who really supports you. Walking away isn't always a sign of weakness. It's powerful. And picking yourself? That isn't self-centered. It is a matter of survival. Tell me, have you ever had to leave family behind in order to maintain your own peace? Have you ever come to the realization that sometimes it's preferable to be alone without the people you should be loved by? If you were moved by this story, please leave a comment. Let's also discuss any toxic family moments you may have had. Tell me your story, please. You should subscribe if you want to see more stories like this one because, believe me, there are a ton more out there. Until then, make your own decision. Always.